Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Thursday, the 14th of July. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 141 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and together we will then look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Russian missiles have struck civilian buildings and a cultural centre in the city of Vinnytsia in central Ukraine, killing at least 12 people, reportedly including a child, and wounding up to 50 others, medics have said. The attack on Vinnytsia, far from the war's front line, occurred in mid morning when the streets were full of people. It appeared to have hit a business centre, setting cars on fire and sending plumes of thick black smoke over the city. Two educational institutions, a transport infrastructure facility, and a hotel have been damaged by Russian missiles in the city of Mykolaiv on Thursday morning, according to the regional governor, Vitaly Kim. Mr. Kim says that as far as it is known, that one person was injured after 9 missiles from an S-300 anti-aircraft missile system were fired at the regional centre. Russian forces achieved no significant territorial advances over the last 72 hours in Donbass, according to the UK Ministry of Defence. The latest British intelligence report reads, in the Donbass, Russian forces continue to conduct artillery strikes across a broad front, followed by, in some areas, probing assaults by small company and platoon-sized units. However, they have achieved no significant territorial advances over the last 72 hours and are in danger of losing any momentum built up following the capture of Lysychansk. A deal to resume exporting Ukrainian grain has been announced with the establishment of a coordination and monitoring centre in Istanbul. Turkey's Defence Minister, Hulusi Akar, said that Ankara will ensure the safety of shipments in transit, and the parties will jointly check grain cargoes in ports after officials from Ukraine, Russia, the United Nations and Turkey met for talks in Istanbul on Wednesday. The UN chief, Antonio Guterres, described the talks as a critical step forward, but said more work was needed before a deal is set to be signed next week. A traffic jam of more than 130 cargo ships loaded with Ukrainian grain is waiting in the Black Sea to pass into the Danube. The ships are waiting to access exit routes through the Sulina and Bistra estuary canals to reach a series of ports and terminals in Romania, from where the grain can be transported on around the world. And Ukraine's top war crimes prosecutor and European judicial authorities met to coordinate investigations into atrocities during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, warning that a failure to do so would embolden autocrats. Now, we're joined this evening by Maureen Watt, who is a retired politician and a former Minister for Mental Health in the Scottish Government. Maureen was the member of the Scottish Parliament representing the constituency of Aberdeen South and North Kincardine from 2011 to 2021 when she retired. Previously, she was a regional member for North East Scotland from 2006 until 2011. Maureen has also been a teacher and a councillor, amongst many other roles. Maureen, good evening. How are you keeping?
Good evening, Andrew. Enjoying this warm weather, although it's okay if you're not having to work outside in it. There was a tiny shower of rain recently, not enough to do anything for the poor farmers, but we're never satisfied, are we? But really enjoying it. I hope you are too.
Thanks, Maureen. Yes, it's been a bit grey in Edinburgh, but it's not raining and it's nice and warm, so it's just fine for the summer. Our first story this evening is that the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has unveiled the second in a series of papers outlining our government's case for Scottish independence. At Bute House, the First Minister published a paper titling Renewing Democracy Through Independence, which outlines her government's belief that Scotland was not able to decide on Brexit on its own, and how subsequent Westminster governments have been installed despite not being voted for by Scotland. The First Minister told the press conference that her paper shows that far from being abstract, this inbuilt deficit has real life consequences for individuals, families, and businesses across Scotland, from the impact of austerity to the implications of a Brexit we did not vote for. Ms Sturgeon added, the discussion could not be more timely or urgent. The democratic deficit Scotland faces is not a recent phenomenon. It has been there throughout devolution, but the evidence of it now is starker than ever. The fact is, independence is not just the best route to renewing and securing democracy in Scotland, which is, in turn, so essential to building the economic and social future we want. Independence is the only credible route. The First Minister was asked whether it was fair for her opponents to question her commitment to democracy, given she appears to not accept the outcome of the 2014 referendum or the 2016 Brexit vote. Ms Sturgeon replied, no, it's not fair, and neither of the assertions you've put to me there are true. The outcome of the 2014 referendum was accepted, and the evidence of that is that Scotland is not independent. The outcome of the Brexit vote in Scotland was that Scotland voted to remain in the EU, and that has not been honoured by UK parties or governments because Scotland is out of the EU. She continued, my stance has been that the outcome of that referendum should be honoured because Scotland should have remained in the EU. Responding to the First Minister's statement, the Labour Party's deputy leader in Scotland, Jackie Baillie, said, so far the SNP's case for independence amounts to a cocktail of wishful thinking and fear-mongering. In a statement this afternoon, SNP Deputy Leader Keith Brown said, this latest paper lays bare that when decisions are made by Westminster, it's Scotland that loses out. Hundreds of billions in oil revenue squandered by the UK Treasury, a crippling decade of Tory austerity, and the economic and social disaster that is Brexit is the legacy of Westminster control. So, Maureen, first of all, do you think is the First Minister's message about the democratic deficit which voters in Scotland face, is that message starting to get through to voters?
Well, I think it will, and I think it is gradually. I think more people are now open to listening to the arguments about independence than they were in 2014, because for no other reason than their economic circumstances are really changing and they're hitting everybody in their pocket, and there's still worse to come. So I think more people this time will engage in the arguments for independence. And I think this series of papers that the First Minister releasing is a very good idea, rather than just waiting for one big book that we had in 2014. And I think that people will, at their leisure, read through um, the pamphlets that she has produced, and increasingly they'll be getting literature through their doors from independent supporting organisations, not just the SNP. And I hope that people will take the time to read them and see that independence is not only possible, but absolutely essential, as the effects of Brexit, which we wasn't on the cards and wasn't on the table in 2014, continues to bite more and more. And Tory austerity is not something that we need to put up with, because Scotland is a wealthy nation. Only the distribution of wealth is totally wrong under the Tories.
Thanks, Maureen. You mentioned that the First Minister, the Scottish Government, are issuing a series of documents in support of the campaign for another independence referendum and in support of independence. So, do you think, so far as the First Minister, is she able to successfully link the message from the first document about the relatively poor economic performance of the UK with the message in the second document about the democratic deficit that voters in Scotland face?
Well, I hope people, as they read them, will see that they're all interlinked. That we need to have one to have the other to have the other. And the democratic deficit, it's good that it's towards the beginning of the series of pamphlets that she has published, because the democratic deficit has been there throughout all my lifetime. I think the last time the Tories had a majority in Scotland was in 1955, when I was 4. So all that time, all that part of my life, we have been living in Scotland with a government that we have never voted for. And I think that people will see that it really is time that we get the kind of government, total government, with all the levers of power in Scotland that we could have with independence and can have with independence, because people have continued to vote for the SNP into government. They can see that we can manage the country as well as possible with the levers that we have. And I think now more and more people are accepting that with the full range of economic and social powers that we can have with independence as opposed to devolution, that we could do so much better.
Absolutely. Thanks, Maureen. Now, as I mentioned, the Labour Party in Scotland's deputy leader, Jackie Baillie, said so far the SNP's case for independence amounts to a cocktail of wishful thinking and fear-mongering. Does Jackie Baillie's criticism stack up at all?
No, and to me, I mean, Jackie Baillie is a clever woman, um, and I think that increasingly you can see that the opposition are running out of arguments and have to sort of badmouth everything. If they had the arguments and not just the old arguments that they trotted out the last time, if they had new arguments, then they wouldn't be saying these sorts of things. They'd be coming forward with positive cases for the union, and that's increasingly impossible, I think.
Now, Maureen, we'll talk more about the Tories in a moment, but it's being reported today that in 2017, in comments unearthed by the National, the candidate who's leading the competition to become Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, said that it would be hard to block another referendum in Scotland, and he suggested holding it after Brexit would give people a clearer choice. Now, do you think that if, and it's a big if he becomes Prime Minister, we will see a change in direction from the Tories, perhaps breaking from their current mantra of now is not the time?
Yes, well, I wish when as soon as every Tory politician says now's not the time, the next question is when is then, because that question never seems to be asked, and of course we know, as far as they're concerned, it's going to be never. Um, my hats off to the person who managed to rake up that old quote from Rishi Sunak. If he becomes Prime Minister, then I'm sure we'll be holding him to account on that. But I'm not holding my breath that he will stand by what he said back then.
He wouldn't be a Tory minister if he didn't change his tune from time to time.
That's true.
And we were talking about now is not the time, and thinking about time. Why do you think it is that unionist politicians think that they have any right to stop the clock on democracy in Scotland?
That's a hard question. I just think they're just so much in their own Westminster bubble. And I think we've talked before about Mary Black's speech that she made about fascism. And I do, I mean, democracy in many countries, in Spain, for example, you can see that it's very fragile. And in very many countries, it's fragile. And I saw an article the other day about how in Arab and Middle East countries, many thought that it wasn't working. So we have always got to fight for democracy. And that really takes us back to the paper that Nicola has launched today about renewing democracy, because we've always got to protect it. Remember why we have democracy: no taxation without representation. And perhaps we need to get back to these kind of basics sometimes.
That's a very good point, Maureen. And I think we've started to see people talking about campaigns for civil rights and civic rights in Scotland as a result of the issues that you're talking about there. Thank you. Now, I said that we would talk a little bit about the Tories this evening, so we'd better get on with that because Suella Braverman is out of the Conservative leadership race as the field narrowed to 5 candidates, with Rishi Sunak still leading the votes from Conservative MPs. Sunak, the former Chancellor, is expected to face either the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, or the Trade Minister, Penny Mordaunt, in the final runoff. Kemi Badenoch, the former Equalities Minister, and Tom Tugendhat also made it through the latest round. Braverman got 27 votes, Tugendhat 32, Badner 49, Truss 64, Mordaunt 83, and Sunak 101. The candidates are expected to take part in televised debates over the weekend before the final rounds of voting next week to narrow the choice to two candidates who will then be put to Conservative Party members. Truss stressed her cabinet experience as she launched her campaign for the leadership on Thursday morning. I can lead, I can make tough decisions, and I can get things done, she told an event in Westminster. I am ready to be Prime Minister from day one. In the first round, Truss came a relatively distant third with 50 votes behind the former Chancellor on 88 and Penny Mordaunt with 67. Britain's new Prime Minister will be announced on the 5th of September after Conservative Party members vote on the two candidates chosen by Conservative MPs. Candidates initially needed the support of the backing of 20 MPs to even stand in the ballot, a threshold that three leadership hopefuls, Sajid Javid, Grant Shapps, and Raymond Chishti, failed to achieve. In the first ballot, for which a candidate needed the backing of a minimum of 30 MPs, Jeremy Hunt and Nadeem Zahawi were eliminated. Candidates are whittled down by a series of voting rounds in which the last placed candidate is knocked out, until there are just two left to face the membership. If one of the two final candidates drops out, the other would become leader without a membership ballot. But candidates have been asked to give assurances that they will not do this. So, Maureen, you've not spoken. You and I have not spoken since this latest Tory crisis unfolded. What's your take on the latest Tory psychodrama?
Well, it's getting wall-to-wall coverage on the 24-hour news broadcast, Sky and the BBC, isn't it? They just do sort of 15 minutes of news, and the rest is interviewing every single Tory backbencher that they can get hold of to find out how they're voting. I mean, it's just totally over the top, in my view. I wonder what else is going on. You know, they say that if something's major is happening, what other news can we get out so
Mm.
that it's not picked up? Um, so that's two votes where Rishi Sunak has been at the top. Perhaps it is looking like it'll be him against whoever of the others. Um, it is looking like Tugendhat's vote is on a sugary peg because it went down on the second ballot rather than up. And I think that does tell us something because he's perhaps the least right wing of all the candidates. So a shift to even further to the right looks to be on the cards. Um, Liz Truss's, what I saw of Liz Truss's launch, she talked about delivery, 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 but I thought it was dull, dull, dull. So yeah, I suppose we just have to wait and see who it will be. I hope, though, it's a woman.
Thanks, Maureen. Well, that's an interesting question, and I was going to ask you about that. Once the final two candidates are selected, they are then the election is then held amongst Tory party membership. As I understand it, 70% of the members of the Tory party are men. How do you think that's going to? Do you think that will affect, and if so, how, the outcome of the final choice as to who is to be the next prime minister?
Well, let's face it. I mean, we have had Thatcher and then May, so a female Tory prime minister is not unusual. But I think perhaps economic matters come before anything else with Tory party voters, and how much money will be in their pockets. So that's perhaps why Rishi Sunak has a lead at the moment. But it will be interesting to see what the final outcome is and where whoever will take on Sunak, if that's what happens, and what the outcome will be. But it doesn't bode well for Scotland, and I don't think it bodes well for those who are just hanging on in there and trying to balance their finances every single day, every single hour, really. You see it happening in the supermarket. now. It's really quite sad, very sad, and not necessary. Because, as we've said before, Britain is a wealthy country. It's only the distribution that's really so far out of kilter now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maureen. We'll stop talking about the Tories and talking about Thatcher for a moment, because European consumers could face the prospect of energy rationing this winter as costs continue to soar amid the risk of Russia cutting off gas supplies, Shell's chief executive has said. It will be a really tough winter in Europe, said Ben van Beurden, speaking at the Aurora Spring Conference in Oxford earlier today. We will all face very significant escalation in energy prices. In the worst case, Europe will need to ration its energy consumption. Factors being blamed for the continuing surge in wholesale energy prices include ongoing uncertainty regarding Russian gas flows into continental Europe, as well as more recent concerns such as the halted strike by Norwegian gas workers and the UK's continued reliance on energy imports. Van Beurden said there was no way of telling whether Russia would restart gas supplies into Europe via the Nord Stream 1 pipeline after maintenance started on Monday. The maintenance is due to conclude on the 21st of July. Putin has surprised quite a few of us, he said. I feel disappointed by the outcomes. He has also shown that he better be taken seriously when he makes threats. For a long time, we thought it was not in Russia's interest to cut off Russia's largest market. He is able and willing to weaponize supplies. The average UK household energy bill is estimated to be on track to reach more than £3,300 annually this winter, more than double the amount that it was at the same time last year, as soaring wholesale energy costs are passed on to consumers. Last week, the research firm Cornwall Insight significantly raised its forecasts to show that the energy price gap in the UK is on track to rise to £3,244 a year in October 2022, in the next quarterly adjustment made by the regulator, Ofgem. In October 2021, the default tariff cap, which is adjusted in response to changes in wholesale energy market pricing, stood at £1,277 annually. By January next year, Cornwall Insights expect another quarterly rise in the annual household energy bills to £3,363. Asked about the contest to become the next UK Prime Minister, Van Beurden said, I hope that there is no backtracking from net zero ambitions. There is a lot of popular opinion out there that is sometimes not helpful. The Shell boss also commented on the energy profits levy on North Sea oil and gas operators. He said, I would have liked to have seen incentives and allowances for those companies that actually invest in energy transition. So, Maureen, if Mr. Putin is using Russian energy as a weapon, then would that not justify taking a more, if you will, wartime approach? For example, as the boss of Shell has said, rationing energy, or taking other exceptional steps to manage markets more tightly and more helpfully from the perspective of consumers who are seeing their annual energy bills soaring.
Yeah, I think there are a number of issues here, and obviously, the boss of Shell is out there backing Shell and backing the oil companies. I don't buy their call for yet again more allowances. I mean, if you look into the UK continental shelf vis-a-vis Norway, you will see that the UK government has paid, as well as having had billions come in, it has given the oil companies a lot of money back in order to have exploration and production compared to Norway. And we've seen the difference because Norway has this huge oil fund now. The other thing is that the EU, I don't think, knows quite what it wants to do on this yet. I haven't really seen what, if they're going to work together. They're going to try to work together, but obviously some countries are much more affected than others from cutting off the gas from Europe, from Russia. And I still come back to the fact that France can put on a 4% price cap on energy bills, but yet we have these soaring energy costs for our um, for our people. Even although the UK is an energy-rich country, the one thing I do agree with him on, though, is about not forgetting about our net zero emissions targets. And I'm glad that he reinforced that, because you do, in all the talk about um, energy uh, from the UK government, you don't hear much about um, zero emissions and about insulation of houses. You hear about going down the nuclear route and the fracking route, but which are just red herrings. We need to be tackling those other issues and increasing investment in renewables.
Thanks, Maureen. We're looking forward to seeing increased investment in renewables, bearing in mind that for several years now, almost all of the gross electricity consumed in Scotland is produced with renewables in Scotland. But we'll move on to another Scottish story now because new research has revealed that between 1,300 and 1,700 job vacancies in Skye are being left unfilled due to a lack of housing for workers. The Business Housing Needs Survey, which was commissioned by Skye Connect, Lochaelsh and Skye Housing Association, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and Highland Council, was carried out by 56 Degree Insight, who interviewed 143 businesses. The survey found that a lack of affordable housing is the biggest barrier to recruitment and retention in Skye and Lochaelsh. A total of 29% of firms have offered a job to someone who has not taken it up, with accommodation issues mentioned in half of the cases. The report will now be used to lobby government and other agencies for investment to ease the housing crisis and protect the local economies, according to the reports in the Press and Journal. Potential solutions to the housing issue include more affordable housing and encouraging private owners to sell land to communities to build homes. Diversifying Skye's economy, which has 1 in 4 jobs in tourism, is also suggested. Factors affecting the housing issue include incoming buyers causing property prices to spike and long-term rental accommodation becoming short-term lets. Skye Connect director Claire Winskill says tourism businesses are struggling to service demand, which is yet to return to pre-pandemic levels. She claims the area has good growth potential and an attractive lifestyle. She added, this is an opportunity, but with 1,300 to 1,700 vacancies across all sectors difficult to fill now, at this moment, that opportunity will be missed. Neil Clapperton, who's the chief executive of the Lochaelsh and Skye Housing Association, commented, if rural economic diversification is to have any meaning, it needs a smart, collaborative, and flexible approach to affordable housing. We need a lot of it, and now. The Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch MSP Kate Forbes, who is also the Finance Secretary, said hundreds of new homes have been built in recent years. She said, despite that, there is still an acute shortage of affordable homes, demonstrating that the issue won't be solved just by building more houses. It is particularly concerning that local people with reasonable incomes cannot afford a home on Skye because the demand for holiday accommodation significantly outstrips supply. She said building more homes without tackling the commercialisation of housing will not solve the problem. The Finance Secretary supports adding a rural burden to more homes. This would aim to stop the sale of a property for profit or to buyers not in the area. So, Maureen, this is likely to be a problem of a lack of affordable housing in a far wider area than only Skye and Lochaelsh, will it not?
It will, but as you've highlighted, and it was highlighted in the PNG, it's particularly acute on the Isle of Skye. Um, and, I would have said much of what you quoted Kate Forbes as saying today, because I know that, she's been at the opening or has opened many of the affordable housing complexes that there has been in recent years on Skye. But I think the second homes issue is really there at the nub of this. I know Neil Clapperton well. He used to work for a housing association in Aberdeen. To me, the issue is the second homes, and I just wonder if people who don't live on Skye and buy second homes in Skye are really aware of what they're doing in disrupting the economy of Skye, because it's no use people coming to Skye, and indeed might have a long-term detrimental effect on the tourism in Skye if people have a bad experience because they can't get their hotel room cleaned, that they can't get food when they want it. We've seen hoteliers say that they're only open 5 out of 7 days a week, for example, and maybe not doing lunches or whatever. So if people are not having a good experience when they are on Skye, whether it's in short-term let accommodation or hotels, that I think is worrying, that it may have a long-term adverse effect on tourism in Skye.
Thanks, Maureen. We'll move on to our next story now, because the campaigning SNP MP Alison Thulis has demanded that the cruel two-child limit and rape clause be scrapped, following new figures showing that 359,000 households were missing out on vital income directly due to the policy. The UK government's own statistics show that 58%, that's 216,000 claimants affected by the policy, are actually classified as being in work, while shockingly, 1,830 women have had to relive the trauma of rape or coercive control to make a claim under the rape clause. The Glasgow Central MP has campaigned to have the two-child limit, which restricts entitlements to benefits to the first two children in any family, scrapped, since it was first announced in 2015. Commenting, Alison Thulis said, "These figures show that the majority of affected households have at least one adult in work, shattering the Tories' dubious claim that work pays, and that this policy is about fairness. Not only is the two-child limit and the associated rape clause deeply cruel and damaging, but it has also been proven to be failing. Any government with an ounce of common sense or compassion would have already scrapped it." The COVID-19 pandemic shows that no one can comprehensively prepare for every eventuality. The social security safety net should be there to support people, not punish them. At a time when the Scottish Government is putting money into people's pockets with the progressive policies like the Scottish Child Payment, the Tories are taking it away again with the callous policies like the two-child cap. So, Maureen, thinking back a little bit to the other stories we've been talking about this evening, given the current UK government's obsession with grabbing headlines and fighting culture wars, is there any prospect, do you think, that the UK government will even acknowledge that there is a significant problem here?
In short, no, because they don't care and they just don't know how ordinary people live. And we can see that from the wealth that some of the contestants have. Um, hats off again to Alison Thulis for keeping on this topic. She's done an awful lot of work on it. But it's just highlighting once again the heaping of injustice on the poor. I mean, we saw that when they took off the £20 tax credit that had been um, given during COVID, when they took that back. They are absolutely hammering the poor and creating this terrible injustice and uh, the distribution of wealth in the UK. And, we keep saying, look at the Scandinavian countries. People there are much healthier and wealthier because the difference between rich and poor is much narrower than it is in the UK. I was really affected by reading the book. What was it called? Oh, it's just gone out of my head now. It'll come come back to me.
That's okay.
About how the inequality in wealth really does badly affect a country, and it's time. I think that, well, we're not going to get a government in the whole of the UK that's ever going to really address this. And as you said, Andrew, social security is there as a safety net. And the injustice of the two-child policy with the rape clause is just beyond belief, and it's really important that people like Alison Thulis continue to highlight this injustice, which won't be solved until we get independence. And while the Scottish Government keeps trying to give to the poor to make their lives better, the UK Government continues to take it away. That's a really sharp, surely, reason for having independence and voting for it in 2023.
Thank you, Maureen. That was very, very well put. Now then, you're a great deal closer to Balmoral than I am this evening, so I think you may be able to comment on our next story, because personalised exemptions for the Queen in her private capacity have been written into more than 160 laws since 1967, granting her sweeping immunity from swathes of British law, ranging from animal welfare to workers' rights. Dozens extend further immunity to her private property portfolio, granting her unique protections as the owner of large landed estates. More than 30 different laws stipulate that the police are barred from entering the private Balmoral and Sandringham estates without the Queen's permission to investigate suspected crimes, including wildlife offences and environmental pollution, a legal immunity that is accorded to no other private landowner in the country. Police are also required to obtain her personal agreement before they can investigate suspected offences at her privately owned salmon and trout fishing business on the River Dee at Balmoral, where anglers are charged up to £630 a day to fish. Under the long-standing but ill-defined doctrine of sovereign immunity, criminal and civil proceedings are not brought against the monarch as head of state, but an investigation by The Guardian, drawing on official documents and analysis of legislation, reveals the extent to which laws have been written or amended to specify immunity for her conduct as a private citizen, along with her privately owned assets and estates and even privately owned businesses. One constitutional expert warned that these carve-outs undermine the notion that everyone is equal before the law, while another recommended the monarchy review and simplify the exemptions for the sake of public transparency. As monarch, the Queen has a public and a private legal persona. The first, Elizabeth II, is the public figure who serves as head of state and who owns historic assets such as Buckingham Palace or the Royal Art Collections, which cannot be sold. The second, Elizabeth Windsor, is a private individual who can buy and sell investments and assets like any other citizen. Although famous for the Royal Association, both the Sandringham and Balmoral estates are private assets of the Windsor family. Unlike other private individuals, however, Elizabeth Windsor has also had personalised carve-outs and exemptions written into swathes of British law, often in areas where she has private interests or investments. There is a clear pattern, and they relate largely to the economic interests of the monarch, said Thomas Adams, an associate professor of law at Oxford University, who examined The Guardian's findings. The UK government and Buckingham Palace refused to answer in detail questions about the process by which exemptions for the Windsor family were obtained. Both declined to say whether the Queen or her representatives had requested private legal immunity be written into these laws. So, Maureen, firstly, when Paul McLennan joined us on Scotland at 7 last night, we were discussing the extent to which the uncodified UK constitution is wholly unfit for purpose. Is this now just another example of that unfitness?
Yes, I think it is. That's the question that I would like answered is one that you highlighted is I would like to know if the monarch asked for these exemptions, or if indeed it was the firm, her advisors that asked for these exemptions, or are they automatically put in by civil servants under successive Labour and Tory governments? Because if it's the latter, then that should be brought up in Parliament as these laws are going through. Or if there's some sort of protocol that this automatically happens, then perhaps, I'm no monarchist, but perhaps when there's a change of monarch, which will come sooner rather than later, whether at that point some of these things can be changed. Because if the monarchy is to survive, then I think it's these kind of things that need to be exposed and need to be dealt with, so that we do have openness and transparency of the monarchy as well as everything else in our society.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned that, Maureen, because I was going to ask you. It struck me that some folks were probably very much of the view that it's the Queen and she's a nice wee old lady, so it's fine. Uh, do you think those opinions might begin to shift when it's Prince Charles who is benefiting personally?
I, I think so. And I think also with um, William having seeming to have more influence, and a younger generation who is, I think, seems to be anyway, a bit on the ball as to how to help the monarchy survive. I think that between Charles and William, perhaps, as I say, if the monarchy is going to survive, that these might be some of the things that they might want to tackle in order to make the monarchy more palatable.
Thanks, Maureen. And one final question on this point. The Professor Thomas Adams says that these exemptions relate largely to the economic interests of the monarch. Now, as the UK economy falters and people struggle and increasingly struggle with a Tory cost of living crisis, are these exemptions likely to be seen by more people as unfair and unacceptable?
I think as they come to light, yes, definitely. We're supposed to be all in the same boat here, but obviously we're not. And it is true. I mean, you know, you can wander on Balmoral Estate. Well, if you're walking in that area, I think particularly when the royal family are not in residence. But nevertheless, I think I have heard in the past of areas where Aberdeenshire Council, for example, have had to make exceptions in relation to some things. I couldn't name you one at the moment, but I can recall that they have had to make exemptions in relation to Balmoral Estate on some things. So yes, it would be interesting to see if under a new monarch, when Her Majesty dies, whether things like this are going to be changed. It would be a wait and see, shall we say, Andrew?
Let's wait and see. Thank you. Now we'll move to our next story, which is one that I know you're interested in and will be able to help us understand and give us some insight for, because a commitment to recruit an additional 800 mental health staff to frontline roles across Scotland has been exceeded. Figures published today show that 958 full-time equivalent mental health workers have been recruited for deployment to hospitals, GP practices, police station custody suites and prisons. This exceeds the target of 800 set in the Scottish Government's Mental Health Strategy 2017 to 27. These staff will ensure people have access to appropriate mental health care in a variety of settings, recognising the life changing benefits of fast, effective treatment. The Mental Wellbeing Minister, Kevin Stewart, said, improving mental health is a priority for the Scottish Government, and these figures show how seriously we are taking this. I am pleased that we have exceeded our commitment and recruited almost 1,000 additional mental health professionals across these key settings. He went on, mental illness is one of the major public health challenges in Scotland. Around 1 in 3 people are estimated to be affected by mental illness in any one year. We want a Scotland where we act on the knowledge that failing to recognise, prioritise, and treat mental health problems costs not only our economy, but also harms individuals and communities. We have allocated nearly £84 million to enable recruitment on these posts, and this has been achieved in spite of the unprecedented impacts of the pandemic on our health and social care services. So, Maureen, you were a public health minister and then you were mental health minister. What's your experience of the challenges of recruiting mental health specialists and getting them into posts in our Scottish NHS and in social care services?
Well, can I first say I'm absolutely delighted with this news today. Um, I think, as you know, I was the first ever dedicated minister for mental health in the whole of the UK. We also think that it was the whole in the whole of Europe. And I remember the World Mental Health Forum coming to Scotland to hold their conference here to find out what exactly we were doing. And I think the key elements are that we made sure that in the mental health strategy, the 10-year mental health strategy, that we highlighted that the parity of esteem between physical health and mental health, and that a person's mental health can be affected by their physical health, and vice versa, and that all health professionals should look at the whole person when they are diagnosing something. So um, the fact that we are putting professionals into frontline services like schools, like GP practices, and people might be interested in the fact that they're in custody suites, but this is a result of a specific uh, thing that was quite unique anywhere in the world that Scotland introduced, which is distress brief interventions, DBIs, and we piloted that in 4 areas in Scotland, and it worked really well. So it's being rolled out, I think, in other areas, but I've seen it work in Aberdeen to great success, where people who, and we know that the police are often the first people who deal with people with mental health illness, that they can immediately get a mental health worker um, to engage with that person and take them through an in-depth but brief period of help. And often that is extremely successful. So I'm really pleased that we're beginning to see a big increase in mental health workers, because they do take time to train. But I know from personal experience a number of people who have been going on counselling courses, and all these people are now coming on stream. And that's that early intervention that we need, so that people do not end having to go into hospital, into a mental health situation, and that we can help them very early on in their distress. So I'm delighted with the progress that's being made in this area, but it's always in the background that economic circumstances and social circumstances are increasing people's ill mental health, and it's dealing with everything in the round. You can't deal with health issues if you're not dealing with housing issues, work issue, employment issues, and so on. So that is why we need independence, because I think that we can give a much better wraparound care to people who are in distress.
That's a very good point that you make, Maureen. Thank you. I was going to ask you that because the Scottish Government's mental health strategy was put in place while you were the minister, you signed it. You were responsible for piloting it and bringing it into effect. Is the strategy achieving what you hoped for back in 2017?
To be honest, I am not privy to exactly whether all the key performance indicators that we put in place have met. I'm sure those do. But as well as the strategy, we did put in milestones that had to be reached during the 10 years. So I'm not privy to that sort of information. But it would be interesting to know just how well they have. I'll have to have lunch with my old colleague Kevin Stewart soon to quiz him.
Well, that's right. That's great. Thank you, Maureen. Now then, there's one more story this evening, and that's because a hidden self-portrait by Vincent van Gogh has been discovered behind one of his paintings, covered by layers of glue and cardboard for more than a century. The image was found when art conservators took an X-ray of Van Gogh's 1885 Head of a Peasant Woman painting ahead of a forthcoming exhibition. They discovered the concealed image at the back of its canvas, hidden by a sheet of cardboard, according to a press release from the National Galleries of Scotland. Experts say the revealed artwork is believed to have been unknown until now. Moments like this are incredibly rare, says Francis Fowle, Senior Curator of French Art at the National Galleries, in the press release today. We have discovered an unknown work by Vincent van Gogh, one of the most important and popular artists in the world. The Dutch master often reused canvases to save money, turning them around to work on the reverse, the NGS has said. The underlying self-portrait is thought to have likely been made during a key moment in Van Gogh's career when he was exposed to the work of French Impressionists after moving to Paris. The X-ray image shows a bearded sitter in a brimmed hat with a neckerchief tied loosely at the throat. He fixes the viewer with an intense stare, the right side of his face in shadow and his left ear clearly visible, according to the press release. While the condition of the actual self-portrait is unknown, if it can be uncovered, it is expected to help shed a new light on the renowned artist. The process of removing the glue and cardboard will require delicate conservation work. Research is ongoing as to how this can be done without harming Head of a Peasant Woman. The painting, which shows a local woman from the town of Neunen in the south of the Netherlands, where the artist lived from December 83 to November 1885, came into the possession of the National Galleries of Scotland in 1960 as a gift from an Edinburgh lawyer. Now, Maureen, once revealed, this self-portrait will be part of a group of several such self-portraits and other works painted on the back of earlier canvases from this period. 5 examples are in the Van Gogh in Amsterdam, others are in the Met in New York, the Wadsworth in Hartford, Connecticut, and the Kunstmuseum Den Haag in The Hague. Does this discovery demonstrate that Scotland has a proper place in amongst these key artistic institutions in the world?
Such a lovely story, and for this painting to be found in Scotland, I just think it hits a nail on the head. Thrifty Van Gogh, and this painting being found in a Scottish museum. I think it's really delightful. Um, and I hope to goodness we can keep it. I can't imagine how they're going to separate the two paintings, but if conservators can do that, that would be really great. And if it is to hang in a gallery in Scotland, hopefully next to the head of the Woman, that would be absolutely superb. Would make Scotland and Edinburgh a come-to place if you are interested in art. Well, not only if you're interested in art, but if you're someone who perhaps goes to all those museums. Netherlands is not far from Scotland. We're possibly going to get a direct ferry link next year or the year after. So that would be great if it could be highlighted and presented and publicised as a museum on people's itinerary. It's a story, and the painting, the self portrait, looks well, obviously really good, but from what I've seen of it, it would be great if they can be separated. And fancy just finding it out by X-raying the portrait. As I say, it's a really delightful story to end on today, Andrew.
It is, and you make a good point. It's a few years since I've been at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, but when I was there, it was mobbed. So it would be a great draw for Scotland. And finally, to turn this conversation back to something we've touched on a few times this evening, does the presence of works of art like this in Scotland that haven't been taken forcibly from other countries, but does the presence of works of art like this in Scotland and in Scotland's national collections suggest that in fact there is a nation we're not too wee, too poor, or too stupid?
Well, absolutely, we're not too wee, too poor, and too stupid. And I think art and culture has really always, I think, had, or even maybe not always, but increasingly had an important part to play in the life of Scots. I mean, we see how well visited our museums are, and thank goodness they're still free to go and see. But we know how hundreds of people flock to places like the Kelvin Grove Museum, and here in Aberdeen, our art gallery has recently been refurbished, and loads of people are going to see the Book of Deer, which has been lent by, I think, Cambridge Museum. It'd be nice if that came back to the northeast of Scotland permanently. But I think culture does play a huge part in Scottish life. And, you know, it's great that a lawyer who managed to buy it for himself has bequeathed it to our national museums and our national collections.
Thanks, Maureen. Yes, Sir Alexander Maitland QC gave it to in the country in memory of his late wife, I understand. But that's all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to develop the station and to make new programmes for you. If you would like to support us, then please subscribe or donate to Broadcasting Scotland. You'll find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work and promotes the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you could like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us again then. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. Thank you to everyone who's been watching this evening, and a very special thanks to our very special guest, Maureen Watt. Thanks, Maureen.
You're welcome.
So I'm away to check the back of all the pictures in the house. Please have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.